Rockford Airport Authority, Thursday, January 27, 2002. And our first order of business is going to be to take a look at the minutes of our regular meeting of December 16th. To see if we might approve this one. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Those minutes are approved. Next, we're going to move on to staff reports. Mike Dunn, Executive Director. Please go first.
Shall we go first?
I can go first. In front of you, you have your financials for December 31st, eighth month of the fiscal year. Apologize we didn't get these out last week. We are going through the software conversion that I've mentioned before, and pretty much complete. Tracy has been reformatting reports, getting data transferred over, and starting to feel pretty comfortable with it. Still working pretty hard to, she's working the software company pretty hard to make sure that they get exactly what we want before we sign off on our go live. But we're getting there. If you look at the third page of your packet is the at a glance. You'll see for the month of December, we ended the month with 17.1 million cash and reserves. Of that, 10.8 million is what's left to be spent from the bond proceeds, the bonds that were issued for construction. That's down from last month, 12.9. Those projects are very heavily in progress right now. The second section on that page is your revenue and expense statement for the year to date, and you'll see the capital outlays near the bottom of that at 35.6 million. Of that, 24 million is related to the bond proceeds from the projects that are tied to those bonds. So that's where you see that big difference in that. So it looks as though we have a negative revenue, but that's because we're using bond proceeds to fund those capital projects. So prior to the those capital projects, we do have a very healthy net revenue for the year. We're doing very well there. If you turn back a couple more pages, we don't have page numbers. That's one of the things we're working through. But if you turn to the statement of revenues and expenses, so you're going to go back a few pages there. This is the full detailed version of revenues and expenses for the year. You will see, and I'm not going to talk about this too much because Zach's going to follow up with some better data on it. But if you look at airport fees airside, you'll see for FY22, which is the second column, we're at almost 5.4 million revenue to date. Year-to-date budget is 4.4, so we're almost $1 million over budget, and we are $1 million, about 1.2 million over FY21. So that's that is pretty much comprised of most of that money is our cargo landing fees, which if you look at the page after that, it kind of breaks down the revenue items, and you'll see the cargo landing fees 5.1 million year-to-date. And budget is 4.16. So, still seeing some big increases there, as well as passenger. I don't know. Zach might have a different opinion, but it feels a little shocking to me that how much the passenger activity has increased in November and December, but very very steadily, and that's reflected on the financials. You can see that in the revenues are exceeding the budget there. The one that Mike asked me about earlier and that I think is always interesting is the parking revenue. Year to date, we're at 607,000 for parking revenue. Our budget for the year was 570,000 to this point. So year to date budget 570. So we're exceeding that budget, and we anticipate that we're going to exceed the budget pretty heavily before year end. If the spring break follows what we saw in November and December, we should have a very healthy revenue from parking. On a net basis, we are at 240,000, and we had budgeted to be at on financials at this point?
Could you comment on commodities? See, that's
Commodities is, so one of the things, and you've probably been hearing this, everywhere, is, things are taking a while to get. So we have been making sure that we have, commodities in on hand. So that is, looking at the statement of revenue and expenses, that's the third item under the operating expenses. And to, Commissioner Pulaski's point, we are at 1.1 million year to date, budget 618,000. We typically purchase the salt, the urea, all of the snow chemicals more on an as-needed basis. This year we're purchasing ahead of time, as well as some of our supplies for our equipment to restock the brooms and, repair brooms and things like that. So, that you see is over budget. It's more of a pre-planning than it is an actual expense. However, coming into January, the snow events have started to hit. December, I think, I didn't even look, but I can't recall, I think we had
Two small events.
two small events, and now in January, we've had a couple events, or probably four now.
I think we're at 6.
Okay, and I know the last couple were very long in duration, so you will see the commodities will increase again in January, but, not as much, they're not tied as closely to the events as they have been in past years. They're a little ahead of time. Say that right, Zach?
Yeah, we're trying to, so when we usually did our normal census, we get a single price throughout the entire season. Contractors they're having a hard time meeting those requirements, so, we work with Quad Chemical, who's one of our de-icing suppliers, basically to buy as much as possible in that original contract amount right up front, knowing that there's gonna be price increases later in the season. They can't maintain supply. So everything, I mean, give you a good example of challenges we're having, oil filters. We're usually for us, when the snow season, we're able to call up our vendors, grab oil filters, do our changes out. We're ordering oil filters, we actually started ordering oil filters, in September, because we had a 36 to 40 week lead time on filters. So just trying to stay in front of it, because we can't afford to have a fuel filter go out, or, not have a piece of equipment down because we don't have a filter.
thank you.
Another aspect of that you're gonna see with the CARES money, we have, CARES grant is coming through as a reimbursable account, so you'll see that up on the revenue. Some of those are operating expenses that are running through here. If you look at the facilities and maintenance, department expenditure page, you can see that one of the bigger ones is, building repair for MRO. Previously the board approved a project there to repair some heat exchangers. So that's another aspect that's bringing that cost up, so. Any other questions?
So actually, Shelley touched briefly on our passenger numbers, and we'll start there. We talk a lot about cargo and seeing our cargo numbers come up. The last 2 months, November, December, we've actually seen gains over 2019 in terms of passenger traffic. In November of 2021, we had, I think, a 50% increase over 2019. And then in December, 26% increase to our largest December ever. We haven't added new destinations or anything related to that. That just goes back to Allegiant adding more frequency. We're seeing additional seats in market. We're seeing people return to travel. And it's equating to, I think we're up about 2,000 seats in total employments over our previous high. Usually we average on a high year between 88 and 9,000 employments. We had over 11,000 employments in December. Allegiant as a airline has been very aggressive. I think Allegiant Southwest are in terms of returning back to service or adding new seats in the market. Those are 2 airlines that have been extremely aggressive over the last 6 to 12 months, trying to get back in the market. It's, their model and leisure base is what's really been growing over this last year. And it'll be interesting to see as we get closer and closer, spring break where those numbers kind of come in at. We have had, like other airports and other locations, you have had some small cancellations related to staffing issues. COVID has created some challenges for the carriers to maintain flight crews. So we've had a couple flights affected by that, but not nearly as bad as we certainly heard of United and American had in November, December. So great to see. I mean, we're seeing the traffic come back around, you know, and then I'll be in San Antonio in February at Routes, trying to, we are meeting with 8 or 9 different airlines, trying to talk about new leisure routes, to try to bring more service to Rockford. And hopefully, you know, being leisure is still what is the focus for the passenger carriers. Hopefully there's some new opportunities for us. Business travel is still very, very challenged at the moment.
Hey, Zach.
Yes, sir.
Before you proceed, can you take a moment and just kind of brief the board and bring them up to date on the 5G issue and the impact
Yes.
on Rockford?
Oh, yes. So 5G.
Maybe explain it too.
Yeah, so I'm sure everyone probably heard, you know, really this past week, 5G was on the news on everything related to air carriers having challenges related to service. It was a massive confusion out in the marketplace. 5G, obviously, it's all related to our phones and higher speed, higher connection. But the problem they have with 5G in the US versus 5G in Europe and other locations is the bandwidth that frequency that it operates on is very close to the same bandwidth is what our radio altimeter, the radar altimeters on the aircraft operate in. So last week when this past week everything was happening, you know, there were carriers reaching out from all over the world looking for alternative solutions to O'Hare, to the point where we had two European carriers were really ready to shift all their ops out of O'Hare into Rockford because there's no other solution. We have our two runways here are both on the approved minimum interference list related to that. So it is something that we're still having conversations with the air carriers and the cell carriers kind of come together on a short-term temporary agreement. The issue's kind of moot at the moment, but it won't be that way forever. The U.S. carriers, I think, have cleared 95% of the entire passenger aircraft for cargo aircraft for the most part are being cleared. But the problem is FAA can't clear foreign air carriers. So foreign air carriers, regulatory agency at their origin have to clear it. So all countries are working through it. There will be solution, but there's still going to be impact. But from our aspect, related to how our runways and 5G in our area, the radio antennas aren't nearly as close to the airport. We have limited impact. So it is one of those items we've had conversations this last week with two additional carriers that we're talking. One was talking about a temporary solution. One was talking about a long-term move to Rockford, and 5G was part of it, but not necessarily the trigger point. So it's not something that's going away immediately. It's something that's still going to be continually out there. It's still going to be a little while before there's a long-term full solution, but we are limited. We're going to have NOTAMs in place, basically our information that goes out to pilots. There is impact if the aircraft does not have a waiver. It's not an airport issue or a FAA equipment issue. It's really aircraft specific in terms of what altimeter and what piece of equipment's inside the plane.
Can you speak to generally about what aircraft don't have the problem?
Yeah, so it's really your newer aircraft that they're having the biggest issue. The 777, the 787, the A350, and the 747-8s. Everything with the newer avionics with the radio altimeters are having the biggest issues. I mean, the fleet that's most affected is the 777. 777 fleet across the world is seeing the most challenges related to it.
So just to add to that, I would say that we had airlines here Monday morning planning for flights to come in on Tuesday.
Yeah.
That's how tight this thing was. And then Monday afternoon, they got the relief.
Yeah, they got the relief. I mean, they're still very, very hesitant on everything. It's still out there. There's no long-term. I said there's no long-term solution yet, but the carriers are working with the regulatory agencies to get the clearance and waivers on the equipment. So for cargo, our cargo numbers for December were kind of what we expected, maybe just a little bit higher than even what we expected. So previously, our highest month ever was 352 million pounds of landed weight. We did that December of 2020. This year, December 2020, we hit 431 million pounds of landed weight. We're ending the year at 3.4 billion pounds of landed weight, which is a 25% increase in the 2020 numbers. look back at 2015, that was our annual land weight, about 770 million pounds. That's kind of our difference in growth for this past year. It was a, we thought on a conservative, when Shelley talks about our landing fee budget, we try to stay conservative with those, but also aggressive with our forecasting, but we still exceeded it roughly by about 10 to 15% of what we thought. So if you look at, if numbers stayed static, 3.4 billion pounds would put us at the 12th largest air cargo airport in the U.S. As of 2019 or 2020 numbers. So we know there's going to be some growth in front of us. We were 17 last year. Quite honestly, we'll probably fall in that 13 to 15 range. Right around airports such as Newark, JFK, Honolulu, right in front of Philadelphia. All large hub airports that are record saving. So great numbers. Like I said, it exceeded a little bit higher than we expected, but it was a great month. This kind of shows us where we were at. Just in 2017 was the first time we broke 1 billion pounds of land weight since 2009. Since the economy, we previously broke 1 billion pounds in 2007, 2008, and 2009. The economy had tanked. We fell below 1 billion pounds in 2010 and stayed there until 2017. 2017 were 1.3 billion pounds of land weight, 2.18, 2.1 billion pounds of land weight, 2019, 2.3, 2020, 2.7, and then 2021 at 3.4 billion pounds of land weight. This is a picture taken the week before Christmas. We actually opened up this section of ramp over here. Actually opened up in October. We opened up the new, finished the ramp first week in December to open up all 6 parking positions. Like I said, this was taken, I think, the Monday before Christmas with 5 aircraft. 4 747s and A340 all parked on our new cargo ramp. And then this is interior pictures of construction of building 2. This is the riser room going in for the fire suppression system. The office is being built out for the car building. Floor got poured 2.5 weeks ago, and you can kind of see it's all starting to kind of come together in terms of what finally getting this construction project pretty close finished. We're looking at late March, hopefully have occupancy and hopefully go into operation in April. And then snow removal, we talked about a little bit briefly with Shelley's presentation. This is, we really got lucky with the snow until right after Christmas. I think we got our first real event right between the week of Christmas and New Year's. But ever since then, it's been pretty much snow every weekend. This is our crew's first weekend off since the New Year. So they were, this last week they had 2 back-to-back events with about 6 to 7 hours between finishing one event, go home, and then come right back on the field to start it again. One of the things too, think about snow removal on the airport. Snow removal on the airport is significantly different than snow removal on the streets. Our crews have to really kind of respond to the airport 2 to 3 hours in advance of the event to get the equipment out of the shop, ready, and ready to run the field. But after the event, you can kind of judge it by last snowflake falls. It's between 12 and 24 hours in cleanup time for us. And at the end of it, when we're done in the field, we still have to clean the equipment before we put it away. So even after we're done in the field, we still got about 2 hours of equipment time to clean up. The guys really work, the crew works really well together to kind of help everybody out. Pull the equipment in, wash it off, clean it off, park it, have it fueled, ready to go for the next event. It's one of those things where, it's when you've been here for a couple days, and one of the last things you want to do is spend a couple hours cleaning equipment, but once it's done, it's clean, it's ready to go, it just makes things so much easier for the next event. We could find hydraulic leaks, we could find issues with the equipment much faster if it's just cleaned up and off the field. We'll go to, just briefly, some trade numbers real quick. These numbers aren't through, they're through the end of November, not through December yet. So what we're seeing, total trade import-export trade to the airport has grown 412%, so far through 2021 over 2020. Total exports up 350%, total imports up 448%. And our rank as a port of entry, this is all port, seaport, land port, airport. We're, in terms of import-export, we are up from 143 to 109. And this gives you a kind of just a view in November, what we're seeing in terms of import-export growth at the airport. Obviously, this goes back to November 2013. This is by value, and obviously up until 2020, we really didn't have much moving through. I mean, we were mostly domestic freight, a little bit of import, export through the UPS stuff, some charter, but nothing really significant. So it's been obviously the last year and a half, we really kind of changed some of those numbers for us. And then when we look at by value, we can look at by value, all gateways were 115, airports were the 29th by value, by weight, the 20th largest airport port of entry, or the 132nd largest port of entry by weight. And then we'll go down, look at, we see a significant growth in terms of, essentially, like I said, we didn't have anything really except for some charters, a little bit through the UPS hub. And then you'll see here in July of 2020, we had our first flight with Senator on June 28th, 2020. And you'll see as we start that first flight, that was started off as once a week, and then just the growth over the last year and a half. And then this is our trade partners who we're trading the most with. This is by value, is with Germany, China in second, Thailand in third. The tonnage changes a little bit. Vietnam comes in. We've seen quite a bit of textiles come in before Christmas. There was quite a bit charters coming through. I believe actually Nike chartered quite a few aircraft bringing equipment through here. And then we'll go down to market share by export. What are we shipping out of Rockford? Medical instruments are number one item coming out of Rockford. Computers, chemicals, X-ray apparatus, vehicle parts. And actually there was one. There was I was looking at a different one earlier. There was an interesting. Yeah. So on import, medical instruments, cell phones, computers, X-ray apparatus. We got medicines, individual doses, vaccine coming in. These are just these are the value products coming in, and then by tonnage, what moves around: medical instruments, dental floss, duty free, just a myriad of items. So we get down and look at our port shares. So we'll switch to airports only. This is kind of interesting. We look at, obviously Chicago here is the largest airport in terms of market share, in terms of value, and obviously we're just barely scraping the surface on the market. Now they're at 23% of the total value in terms of import through airports, and we're at 0.23%. We're just barely touching the surface on any of this. And then we look at airports we're in front of: Orlando International, Detroit, Charlotte, Louisville. Even Louisville, because Louisville's only international import or export is UPS. There's nothing else coming in and out of there. So by far, even UPS's hub, we're seeing more by value through Rockford. So this just kind of interesting. This is all data that is generated through U.S. Census.
It's not our data.
It's not our data. No, this is all stuff that the importers and exporters have to report. We see it roughly 45 days after, and the USA Trade Numbers puts it all together in a way we kind of digest it a little bit easier.
So the majority of our time right now is being spent on financial issues, getting ready for the new year budget. Department's working, Shelby's been working hard with those folks. The other thing is that you'll see the resolution tonight for SASI, the consultant. We've been heavily involved in SASI in terms of long-range planning on how we're moving ahead in the cargo world. So a lot of discussion there with our own cargo folks in SASI, and we've had, since we last met, multiple airline visits here. So we've got them coming in from all over the world right now, talking to us. Anybody else? Sally? Take the first report.
Okay. I'd say that's a remarkably excellent report on several levels, financial and operational. We're gonna move on to, any old business. Any new business? Next, we'll have public comment, and, I think we're calling Mr. Tim Schaefer for 3 minutes.
As everybody's aware, I sent, several of us firefighters that used to work here, we had some concerns about something that was said, so we tried to send some information to educate the board about the time frame that everybody there probably knows what I'm talking about. I'm not gonna go into real good specifics tonight. I think it's only fair to let everybody think about things for a little bit, but civility, I think, is a very important thing, whether it's people with the bellbowl or our issues that we brought up. It's how we communicate with somebody that can be very important. You might disagree with a lot of things we say, you might disagree with things that they say, but I think I've never tried to disrespect anybody on that board. I always try to refer to people as Mr. whatever's way. I've been trained as a former Marine police officer since 1986. I just recently retired, but I just didn't really appreciate the comments that came back from Mr. Dunn. Like you say, you like to talk to people out and over a cup of coffee. I would love to meet with you and just talk. And let me, not in 3-minute time sections, but to actually get our points across. We have some serious issues. But the last one, a lot of people on the board, I don't even know if you were familiar with a lot of stuff that happened during that time frame. We were here. I just looked up tonight and I found some letters that were sent to me by that individual that were, I think everybody would say they were kind of threatening and hostile. I'm not talking about you on this one, Mr. Dunn, but from that time frame. So I'm asking that I think there's a violation of the civil policy of how you deal with people. And I asked the board to take a look at that, and I leave that up to you. And I do have several people that are in our group there from out of state. They're asking you don't just hear from me all the time. Is there any way they could call in via Zoom and maybe you can hear from them where it's not just me or Greg, at this point. And I think then you could get a little bit of perspective. The one person that really wants to speak is Dylan LePen. He was an officer here about 10 years. He was a former retired out of the Air Force prior to coming here, 20-year veteran, was in some war zones. He's facing 3 different types of cancers, completely distinct. One is throat cancer. Finally got that worked out, and a couple years later, lung cancer popped up. Managed to survive that, and now he's faced prostate cancer. As these meetings go forward, I'm gonna start naming all of our different officers that are affected by the cancer issues. I believe this is so important, and I don't think the board's really taking it with the seriousness that we think it should be. But like everything board related, it's up to you. I'm just a private citizen. I don't have I don't know if Mr. Dunn speaks for the airport authority, and like what he says is actually what y'all represents you. But I'm not gonna read what he said to me. If you want me to, give me a little extra time. I'd be glad to actually read what I'm talking about. Otherwise, and I'm gonna leave it at that tonight.
Thank you. Next, we'll call on, Don Miller.
Thank you for the work you do in the community and giving us opportunity to speak my mind. I was born and raised, and I'll be buried in Winnebago County, a place that I've loved all my life. I was fortunate to have parents that introduced me to the natural world and helped me experience its beauty. For that, I'll be forever grateful. I came home from college in the late 70s with a degree in biology. By this time in my life, I knew the forested areas and all the rivers of Winnebago County very well. I was introduced to the prairie ecosystem while I was away at college, so when I came home, I started to explore the prairie surrounding my home ground. I heard about the Fells and the work that they were doing at Natural Institute. In the early 1980s, a group was formed called the Prairie People. It was an assemblage of dedicated volunteers doing restoration and educating others about local remnant prairies and their importance. It was a great time of enlightenment in my life. During the 80s and 90s, we spent time on numerous prairies throughout the county, including Bell Hole Prairie. We hosted walks at these areas, we took people to see the rare Carolina anemone, cactus, prairie dandelion, and the Bell's vireo found here at Bell Bowl. We hosted one of our annual Prairie Appreciation Days, that was attended by 75 some people here at Bell Bowl. I have a vintage 1985 Bell Bowl Prairie t-shirt. It says, if you can't read it, Bell Bowl Prairie, Greater Rockford Airport, a protected refuge of the Illinois native species. It doesn't fit anymore. We only save and protect things that we understand, love, and have a connection to. Bell Bowl Prairie is 8,000 years in the making. It's a place full of complex relationships between soil, weather, plant, animals, fungi, and so much more. As unique in this world as anything can possibly be. We can find a way to honor it, protect it, as well as have an expansion of the airport. I've been walking through Bell Bowl Prairie for over 4 decades, and I know its true worth. And I wonder how many of you as board members or staff have been on it. Not just on it, but try to understand it, to appreciate it. David Brower has said one of the misgivings of the environmental movement is that we don't invite those holding political office or those in decision-making positions to get out behind their desks and visit natural areas that are so important to all of us. I worked for almost 3 decades at a place that had 15, 20,000 school-age kids, as well as adults that came through for education programs. But when it comes to protecting land, one needs only to educate 1 or 2 people about the importance of the property they own, and it can be protected. I'm sure a relatively small group of people made the decision to plot the destruction of this priceless piece of history and its future. And those of you in front of me tonight can't undo that decision of destruction. I've been on the prairie with previous airport administrators and staff members. I know that currently all the boxes have supposedly been checked to get the okay to legally desecrate this prairie, but that does not make it the right thing to do. I would like you to experience Bell Bowl and have an understanding and develop appreciation for it. I would be glad to go with you on that exploration. As anyone you hear that's supporting Bell Bowl Prairie, if you'd like to stand up, would you? Thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Jackie Carota. I'm a senior at Rockford High School. I'm a member of the Illinois Young Birders, and I'm a youth board member at City Audubon Society. I care about nature, the habitat, and the environment, and the future of all these in our community. We are at the beginning of another mass extinction. During the past decade, and almost half my lifetime, 467 species have been declared extinct. Others have been brought to the brink, and many are seeing serious declines in their population numbers. Entire ecosystems are collapsing because of human development and expansion. As you are aware, right here in Rockford, on this property, an ancient 8,000-year-old prairie is slated for destruction. The prairie contains some of the most intact and undisturbed natural plant communities found anywhere in the state of Illinois. There's less than 1/100th of the prairie remaining in our state. And dry gravel prairies like Bell Bowl, which rest on the substrate of bone deposited when glaciers retreated thousands of years ago, are almost extinct. There were once hundreds of acres of this land in the state. Bell Bowl consists of less than 20 acres of the entire 80 acres remaining. It is also habitat for 9 state and threatened endangered species, as well as the federally endangered rusty patch bumblebee. The rusty patch bumblebee has declined 87% in the last 20 years. The species is likely to be present in only 0.1% of its historical range. These bees once occupied grasslands and tall grass prairies of the upper Midwest and Northeast. But most grasslands and prairies have been lost, degraded, or fragmented by conversion to other uses. They need areas that provide nectar and pollen from flowers, nesting sites, and overwintering sites for hibernating queens. There is most likely a hibernating queen in the soil at Bell Bowl Prairie. but you still wanna pave over it. You'd rather talk about profits and revenue than look toward the future of my generation and future generations that want to be able to see what a dry gravel prairie looks like and watch a rusty patch bumblebee fly from plant to plant. You pretend there are not solutions to having both the prairie and the airport expansion when they have been presented to you. You will not take the time to listen to these solutions. You are failing us, and the younger generation is watching you and will not forgive you if you destroy Level Prairie. Thank you for your time.
We'll move on to resolutions and ordinances.
Motion to approve resolution 22-01, approving the professional services agreement with Strategic Aviation Solutions International, SASI, of Marco Island, Florida, effective January 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2023.
Second.
This is what I referenced earlier, is an agreement with SASI, who's a professional cargo consulting company, cargo consulting company, which is, the principals are former CEOs of major airlines, and they have already begun to work with us in terms of guidance and counseling and forward thinking on cargo operations, as well as bringing potential airlines to the airport, which we're already in conversation with some of these airlines. So the staff views them as very, very important to us at this stage.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The resolution passes.
Motion to approve resolution 22-02, approving an amendment to AIA document A-141 Exhibit A, establishing the cost of work